Hello everybody, this is Nato at the Nest with another update for the Cold War scenario, and I'm actually going to start this off with answering a question. This goes out to Will Wow. You asked if there would be nukes or ICBMs in this scenario, and that's going to require a bit of an explanation, but the short is nukes, yes, ICBMs, that depends. There are nuclear weapons in the Cold War, but they can only be used if World War III gets triggered. Now there's three times where World War III can be triggered. The first being the Korean War, which just got finished, and how that's triggered is if if China intervenes in the Korean War, and then America attacks any forces or facilities in mainland China, that'll automatically trigger World War III. And as in, Russia gets in, Russia enters, and then all the NATO nations enter, and it's full global war. And if that happens, then nuclear weapons will be unlocked, and the various nations that had nuclear weapons in the 1950s will have the option of using them. If World War III triggers this early, ICBMs will not be available because it's 1950. It's it's early 1950s, and ICBMs, well, there's actually several different types of ICBMs. There's there's short range, mid range, and reach out and touch anyone on the globe range. I'm assuming you're talking about that last variant, and in 1954 ICBMs did not exist that could touch anywhere on the globe. They had short range and mid range, but you couldn't, say, launch an ICBM in the middle of Siberia and have it touch down in Kansas. ICBMs with that kind of range just didn't exist yet. So if if that's the kind of ICBMs you're talking about, then if World War III gets triggered this early, then no, ICBMs will not be available. Nuclear weapons will be. They have to be delivered by a heavy bomber and chance for interception and all that fun stuff. The second time it can be triggered is during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and kind of similar to Korea, nuclear weapons delivered via bomber, heavy bomber, is available. We still didn't have ICBMs that could reach anywhere on the planet. They of course had developed ICBMs that could go further. I think Russia was sporting some mid-range ICBMs that had something like 2,000 to 3,000 mile range or something along those lines. But still not the reach out and touch anyone anywhere on the globe variety. And then the third time World War III can be triggered is its, for lack of a better term, its scheduled start date of 2050-ish. That ICBMs will be available, and they can launch and hit anywhere on the globe. I don't remember if I explained my idea for nuclear weapons or not. If I have, excuse my rehashing of it, but if I haven't, nuclear weapons are going to be very, very hard to use, because I don't want it to be, only round 2 and someone launches and then now everyone else has to launch, and it just turns into a launch fest and it's only turn 2 and the game's over because everyone's dead. I don't want that. I want you to actually have to play the game strategically and not just launch at the first opportunity, because, there's always that asshole. So using nuclear weapons will be very, very hard. It's not something you can just do right out of the gate because you feel like it. The short and simple of it is, if you want to launch, everyone in your faction has to agree to it. So certain factions that'll be easier, like Russia's faction, there's only 3 members, so they only have to get 3 people to agree. But NATO, as you can see, there's 7 members, so for NATO to launch, it has to get all 7 to agree to it, so that'll be a little harder. So and then there'll also be, they're nuclear weapons, so there are going to be massive consequences to using them, because wherever it hits, that territory and every surrounding territory is completely useless and off limits for the rest of the game. And so, including production, so Russia decides to nuke half of Europe. It's now cut itself off from half of Europe, all of its production, and it can't even move through it because it's irradiated. And yeah, there's chem suits, but chem suits are temporary protection. They're not going to protect someone who's for years on end of constant exposure. That's not how chem suits work. That's 12 years of military talking, in J-list suits and the old chem suits. They're temporary protection. You can't fight a campaign in irradiated zones, and and expect to survive. The filters on those things are only good for a couple hours, let alone the actual suit itself. So but I think that's at least for now, that's all there is to nuke. So we'll get explain it in more detail once we get to World War III. As for what's been going on in the Cold War so far, it is now the first half of 1954. The Korean War is over. NATO won. For NATO to win, they just had to keep South Korea free and independent. For the Communists to win, they had to conquer South Korea. I think I said in the last video, America did decide to intervene, and then China decided to intervene after that. Started off with North Korea invading South Korea. America was in place to respond very quickly, counterattacked, and with combination of South Korean and American forces, South Korea providing the manpower, America providing the firepower, were able to push the Communists out of South Korea completely, and almost had North Korea taken out. But then, as you can see, Chinese manpower arrived and retipped the balance, and actually put the NATO forces on the defensive for the last 2 or 3 turns of the war. But too little, too late. The Communists couldn't gain a foothold, and were unable to take South Korea. So that's a victory point for NATO. So NATO's now standing at 2 points to the Communists 1. So the score is 2-1 in NATO's favor so far. Vietnam continues to go very poorly for France. France has just started to be able to build up forces in Vietnam, but kind of like North Korea, it's too little too late because there's only one turn left in Vietnam's rebellion against France. And for Vietnam, it has 3 territories. It just has to have control of one of them to win. For France to win, it has to regain control of all 3 territories, and it only has control of 1 at the moment, so it looks like France is probably going to lose, and that will be a victory point for the communists, so it looks like it'll be, next turn it'll be tied up 2-2 again. Russia just continuing to build up in case World War III kicks off early. The next, like I said earlier, the next window for World War III kicking off early is Cuban Missile Crisis. The influence fight over African nations has been going in Russia's favor. As you can see, they got 4-3 in Nubia, and Russia's just been kicking the crap out of NATO and Kufra. It's 4-0. Russia's won every single influence role in Kufra. France is starting to build up in Algeria, because that's the next African colony, or next French colony to revolt. And in terms of the other allies, they're just building up. England's building a fleet and an army. Argentina's building up to potentially go after the Falklands. Germany's just building up its ground forces. It's probably, when World War III kicks off, Germany's probably going to be the primary ground force for continental Europe. Depending on when it kicks off, France isn't going to have much of an army because it's tied up in overseas fights. And that's about it so far. The big thing for 54 is a bunch of new models unlock. So America and Russia will be upgrading, and China will be upgrading a lot of their units. America, F4s, F-104s, C-130s, B-52s, Hueys, all will be unlocked, so start seeing a lot of new scopes on the board. For Russia, we're going to start seeing MiG-19s and Mi-8s coming out. For China, we'll see Mi-8s, so be a lot of upgrading going on. With that, cut the video there, mostly because I don't have a choice. Battery's about to die. So we'll come back with the second half of 1954 and see what happens with France in Vietnam, even though it's pretty clear what's going to happen, but we'll see you then. Hello everybody, this is Nato at the Nest with an update for the Cold War, and this is the second half of 1954. And like I said, last video, a bunch of hardware will be being upgraded in the next preceding turns. You can already see some of that. Russia is upgrading its planes. We got the new MiG-19s coming out. America started putting out new heavy bombers. China's put out the first helicopter, the Mi-8. And China started building a major factory, and America's started building an airfield in Guam. The last video, the Korean War ended, so America's pulling all of its troops out of Korea, sending them back to the States to be upgraded, new tanks and new mechanized vehicles and stuff. One of the things America can do is its old heavy bombers, it can convert those into air transports. It can carry 2 infantry or 1 of any other ground unit. So that's one of America's big advantages, is it can produce large cargo planes, and if it can build up a sufficient fleet of those cargo planes, it can move troops anywhere across anywhere on the globe very far faster than anyone else can. So America won't have to rely on slow transports lugging their way across an ocean that takes 2 or 3 turns to get across the ocean, where America can use air transports to get that same army anywhere on the map in 1 turn. Let's see, the influence continues to go badly for America and Kufra. Russia has won 5 straight influence rolls. And in Nubia, it remains tied up for peace. The big event of this turn is the Vietnam War against France is over. As you can see, France lost. The Vietnamese did a kind of an all-out assault on the French forces, and for those of you who know your history, kind of had a repeat of Dien Bien Phu, that last major battle between France and the Vietnamese. That French mechanized infantry is the only thing that survived. So Communists get the victory point for that, so it's Cold War scoreboard stands at 2 points for NATO and 2 points for the Communists. Unfortunately, France doesn't get any respite because Algeria revolts this turn. So France goes from one war straight into the next, and as you can see, France pre-positioned troops in Algeria to fight that. France should have a little bit easier time fighting this because it's got a lot shorter distance to go to get troops there. You can just hop across the Med instead of having to go all the way through the Med, through the canal, all the way down the Gulf, all the way across the Indian Ocean to get there. With the Korean War over, that closes the window for World War III kicking off early. Next window will be the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's let's see, 54, that's over 10 years away. So right now the big thing for most nations is to upgrade their hardware. For France is to fight another war. So with that, we'll cut it there, and we'll come back when something else happens of note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.